What's up again there, guys? Brian here at 3Turn. Welcome to the next episode of the People's Questions, where I answer all the awesome questions that you guys have sent this past week. Though last week's episode was a little bit slow, I'd say in terms of questions, we got a pretty standard episode. I think we got maybe one or two newbies, so that'll be fun to try out. So starting off real simple with the first question coming from Shiny Mega Gengar. And you want to know, if I could bring back a video game franchise, what would it be? In terms of bringing back a franchise, I can't think of too many long-standing franchises that are currently dead. But if I could continue a franchise, which I've been waiting, I was hoping they would announce a sequel at this year's E3. I would love to see a continuation of the Dead Space franchise. The Dead Space franchise is by far one of my favorite franchises. It's currently my favorite survival horror franchise. Definitely way above Resident Evil. And I just don't know why they haven't announced a Dead Space 4. Because Dead Space 2 and Dead Space 1 are like two of the only three games in the history of video games that have ever actually legitimately scared me. The first one obviously being Resident Evil 4, because I think that was my first entry into the franchise. But the way that they left Dead Space 3, there's definitely room for improvement or a continuation of that story. And the fact that it has its own novel series and its own comic book series and its own two set of movies. This was a great franchise, and I'd like to see it continue. I know that some people were disappointed with Dead Space 3, but I didn't think it was a franchise killer. Next question comes from, let's see, I believe the first newbie of the episode, and you go by the name of Diadrive CJ. Hope I said that right. And you want to know whom is my favorite voice actor in either English, Japanese, or Spanish? I guess if I can be honest, I think Mark Hamill. Not just because of his work with the Joker. He's done a number of animated characters in both animated movies and in several video games, if you can believe that. So it's just kind of ironic that probably one of the most iconic good guys of all time has the voice of so many great villains, and he's fantastic. I absolutely love his work as a villain, so I'd have to go with Mark Hamill. Next question comes from Demetrius Puffer. And this is kind of a continuation from your last week's question. And what you meant to say is, have I ever thought about playing Demon's Souls, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, or Dark Souls 3? Probably not. I'm not really a big fan of those dungeon-like, I call them American RPGs. I'm just not really a big fan of that. That type of game kind of reminds me of like The Witcher, and that's another franchise I don't like playing. So, no. In terms of those type of RPGs, I'm not really a big fan of those. The next question comes from Andrew Rogers, and you want to know, do I have any thoughts on the upcoming Ace Combat game? Yeah, looks like it's gonna be a ton of fun. I'm not say the biggest fan of flight simulators, but I did pick up the latest Ace Combat, and I had a blast with that. So this is definitely a game that I'll certainly play, because I guess I could pick a game that I'll be able to buy the time till the next main game. But in terms of the franchise itself, I'm not a big fan, but I definitely am looking forward to the next installment. The next question comes from Dr. Hino419, and you sent in 3 questions, so I'm only going to answer the first one, because as the People's Questions operates, I only answer the first question. So you want to know, what do I think of Final Fantasy Versus 13 What do I think Final Fantasy 13 would be about if Square Enix never interfered and just let Nomura do his work? Like, do you think it would have had a better plot, story, diverse characters, more unique NPCs, and its ending? Well, for starters, I looked at the rest of your questions, and I can tell you probably didn't like Final Fantasy 15. I personally really liked Final Fantasy 15. Definitely better than the Unlucky One and its bullshit sequels, which I refuse to acknowledge. But I personally felt that it brought the franchise back on track. If you ask me for my opinion, I think that 15 is exactly what we should have gotten following 12. I think it should have gone from 12 to what we got in 15. I thought it was a great game, and I would probably say that it has my favorite, not just battle system, it has my favorite party to play with. Not so much story, because there are definitely some issues with the story in terms of its pacing, especially in the last third. But going back to your original question, if they had kept it the same, I have to believe that there's a lot of elements that would have stayed that we got in 15. I think that they just made a number of alterations. So I think that the base concept would have stayed the same. I think they just would have changed a few elements, but I think we would have gotten something very, very similar. I know that there's one key character, this female, that they replaced with Luna, and I think that's probably the one main element that would have changed with the plot, but I think we would have gotten something very, very similar. But overall, I don't mind the changes, because you know, that game was in like development hell for a whole decade. So the fact that it's finally out, I can't complain, because I'm personally satisfied with what we got. The next question comes from JesseCom03. He wants to know, if I already know the answer, I'm sorry, but for wasting time, but do I think the Obi-Wan Kenobi Padme are together theory is possible? You've debunked it because you thought it was stupid in your opinion. And I absolutely agree. For those of you that don't know, there's this theory that's been going around that there is a possibility that Obi-Wan Kenobi was secretly having an affair with Padme behind Anakin's back. This is stupid and ridiculous for so many reasons. But let's go over the three main ones. Number one, that is not something Obi-Wan Kenobi would do to Anakin. As we know, Anakin is a brother to Obi-Wan. We know this. Why in God's name? And Obi-Wan already knows, even though they don't talk about it. This has been stated in several novels, that Obi-Wan Kenobi knows that Anakin and Padme are probably a little bit more than friends, but they just don't talk about it. So why in God's name would Obi-Wan Kenobi even attempt it? Number two, Obi-Wan Kenobi has never been interested in Padme. She is a loyal friend. He's known her since she was Queen of Naboo, when he was a much younger Jedi. And that's about it. Just because your best friend and brother is dating this senator doesn't mean he's interested. And he already had a love interest who tragically died. And Obi-Wan Kenobi is the quintessential Jedi. And Jedi try not to make too many romantic attachments. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but Obi-Wan Kenobi has already experienced love, and so he probably is not really in any position to even attempt that. And number three, I kinda just don't think Padme would do that to Anakin. She's very much loyal to Anakin. So it just doesn't work from all these points of views. Now, I understand that if you actually look at the film and read the book, there are a couple of scenes, and even there's one moment where Palpatine kind of hints at that. Because I do crawl in like one deleted scene where I think Anakin had sensed that Obi-Wan had been there before he got there, and even Palpatine was kind of hinting, saying, I think Padme's been talking to a certain Jedi. And even before the final battle, he's like, he thinks that Padme brought Obi-Wan Kenobi to Mustafar to kill him because she's with him, and even, you know, shouts out the line, "You will not take her from me." And yeah, there's definitely some evidence that hint at it, but there's not a slick of proof. It's just too ridiculous to believe in. The next question comes from Bill the Spy, and he wants to know, if I were a Sith Lord, how would I go about dealing with the issues that both the old and new Sith tend to face? And would I follow the whole code entirely? Okay, so the problem with the Sith is that it's in a constant state of changing. It's not like the Jedi, where its rules are in concrete. But it kind of depends on which era you're dealing with. If you're dealing with the pre-Bane era, before the Rule of Two, the problem with the Sith is that Sith are very, very power hungry, and it's kind of hard to keep a group of individuals together when everyone is always wanting to be the top Dark Lord of the Sith. Everyone is vying for that position, and so people are constantly bumping each other off. And that's kind of what led to its initial destruction. It was all this infighting. Bane saw this, and he decided, you know, instead of having all these Sith, it should just be reduced to 2. One to embody the power, and one to crave it. I think the problem that Bane saw was that if you've read the Darth Bane trilogy, at some point Bane is very depressed because it's been 30, I say well over 20 years since he found Darth Zana, and he was concerned that Zana was not going to follow the tradition and the rules of two, meaning that he felt that she was going to wait until he was weak before she would try to take him out. And he wanted her to challenge him when he was still in his prime. And at some point, Darth Zana thought that Bane was betraying the rule of two because she felt that he wanted immortality so that he would never die and she would always remain the apprentice. And so both of these two kind of ended up going against each other, and this tradition went over and over and over again. I think the problem with the rule of two is that both parties understand that there has to be a conflict. But because whoever is the master can't live forever, they might not have time to find another apprentice. Now, this was something that Sidious kept dealing with, and this is why if you actually read further into the EU or the, Legends continuity, Palpatine had like several clone bodies. So if Vader didn't pan out, he would try to find someone else. But his body would continually begin to degrade because his enormous strength and dark side of the Force would cause his body to wither and die, and so he constantly needed new bodies. And then if you go even further into the Darth Krayt era, where he pretty much made the one Sith, and he was somehow able to find some sort of unity, but again, he was starting to deal with the older problems with the one Sith. If it were just me, the way I would deal with this is that I don't think it's wise to just have two Sith, because there has to be a conflict, and so you're kind of counting on your apprentice on finding someone else before they try to take you down. I don't think there should be that kind of infighting. I think that there should be a council that is willing to govern certain areas, and so instead of having one Sith wanting to rule the whole galaxy, why not divide it into sections? I think a system like that could work. It's like, okay, if we happen to rule the galaxy, you govern, say, the Outer Rim. I will govern this part of the galaxy. And we stick to our sectors. That way we are all equally powerful. And as long as each person is in control of their own area, I don't think there's any reason to want to gain even more powerful, because in your sector, you are the most powerful person in your sector. And you have no real ambition to want to grow your territory because it belongs to another Sith who is just as equally, not any more or any less powerful. I think that's the kind of system I would try to build. But again, anything can happen, and as happens many, many times with the dark side has a tendency to turn on itself. But that's just what I would try to do. The next question comes from Michael Beelan. He wants to know, have I played any of the games in the Portal series? No, I've never actually played it. It just didn't look like a puzzle game I would really be interested in. The next question comes from JBat. He wants to know, am I a fan of the Adam West Batman? I did happen to see a few episodes of the Adam West Batman series, but it was a little bit campy for me. I mean, that's what Batman was, before he got all dark. It definitely had some pretty funny, entertaining moments, and definitely classic moments, but I wouldn't say I was really a big fan. He definitely had his charm, don't get me wrong, but I'm not really a big fan of it, but still entertaining. And the last question of the episode comes from Abil Z, and you want to know, how big is my video game collection? I'm pretty sure I have well over 100 games. A mixture of N64 games, PlayStation 2 games, PlayStation 3 games, PlayStation 1 games, PlayStation 4 games, and that's maybe a few PSP games, PS Vita games, definitely games across all the platforms of PlayStation, and maybe that's about it. Definitely well over 150 games. If anyone would like me to actually do a video going over my entire video game collection, I wouldn't mind doing that, because I do recall I did a video game collection video years ago, but I think it was still during the PlayStation 3 era, so it probably significantly has grown since then. And with that, those are all the questions you guys have sent me for this episode. I'd like to thank all of you guys for making this episode possible. If you guys have any more questions you'd like me to answer in next week's episode, be sure to send them in the comments down below. Make sure you get them in to me before next Wednesday, before I start filming this. And remember, it's only one question per person. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I will see you next time.